Are we?
Yes.
Where are we?
Here.
Why are we here? Not entirely clear. We are misfits thrust into existence by random chance, with no hints at all as to how we're supposed to make sense of it all. It's immensely bizarre. Here we are.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Here We Are podcast. I'm very excited to do yet another One Health Initiative episode. If you're unfamiliar with One Health because you're new to the show, don't you worry. We're going to be talking a bit about that, but just the general gist for any of you newcomers. It's really just a organization that I believe in, but also I just think is really valuable for you guys, the listeners, to see how so many different fields of research connect together in ways that you wouldn't make the connection on your own, and just seeing the vast complexity that goes into solving each of life's problems, and all of the stuff that science is doing that's running in the background all of the time that the public generally isn't privy to at all. And so it's just been a really fun, cool insight into that world. And today's guest is especially involved in interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary work, and thinking about things in this way in terms of environment and sustainability and rural farming and the many other topics that we've talked about regarding the One Health Initiative in the past. So I'm excited to be talking from the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. Dave Ader is joining me today. Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, no problem. It's great to be here.
This is day 2. We tried yesterday. I was so excited. Dave, you're going to be a really memorable guest. I do one of these a week. So sometimes they blur together a little bit, but you're already close to hero status for me because you live in a cabin, a self-sustaining-ish cabin in the woods.
We're trying.
And it's incredible. And the only thing that you don't have is perfect broadband internet. You still
Right.
had internet, just not quite strong enough for the incredible quality that I provide on this show. So we decided to scrap it after some connection issues and record here in the university. So thanks for being accommodating, and also thanks for showing me your cabin. I'm so inspired. First, before we get into your work, let's just tell the audience about the cabin. This is a dream of mine. I want to know how you did it. I always, when I was younger, I was like, I'm from a smallish, there's a city, La Crosse, Wisconsin. It's maybe 50,000 people when schools and smaller than that when I was growing up. And I'm from a smaller suburb outside of it. But nothing but farmland between 2.5 hours to Madison, 2.5 hours to Minneapolis. And so growing up, I was like, I'm going to go to the Big Apple. I'm going to live in a big city. And then became a comedian, did all that stuff, been to a zillion big cities. Love them, had a great time. But so often, especially since COVID, I'm like, you know what? Cabin in the woods, off the grid. I'm doing it. And off the grid always feels like something that I see some person on Instagram is trying to do, and I'm like, that's not real. No one really does that. So tell us all about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great chance to just sort of test out different ideas. Really, I'm very fortunate that I have family that has a little bit of land here outside of Knoxville. And so when I moved here, my brother's farming it, but there's places that are forested on the land. And I thought, I'd really like to try that, to just sort of see if I can build myself just a little cabin right in the forest there and see what that looks like. I mean, part of the inspiration was I do a lot of work internationally, and I work with rural populations everywhere, and some pretty simple accommodations that people have. I don't know, when I was in Peace Corps in Zambia, I lived in a little mud hut, and it's seeing that it's pretty simple, but yet it can be pretty comfortable and pretty easy. But seeing if that's possible in the U.S. and seeing if I could do that here in Knoxville and what that looks like with a full-time job at the university. And so, but it's been a really good experience to try to do it. So I just kind of got the idea that I would try, and I've spent the last 3 or 4 years trying to build an acceptably comfortable cabin. I do, like you said, I'm not connected to the electric grid. I have a small generator if I need electricity, charge a laptop, charge a hotspot for Wi-Fi, those kinds of basic things, just a basic well water and septic system, big garden to try to grow some vegetables, things like that. It was supposed to be kind of, the idea was just, it's like one of these little tiny houses that people are doing these days, right? It's just, just build a little tiny house. But I was trying to source a lot of the materials from the land. So the wood, the rocks, those kinds of things. And I found some really great resources. And so I didn't want to kind of skimp out on the resources. So I just went with what I had, and it got a little bit bigger than a tiny house, but it's a lot of fun. It's definitely unique. People either think it's really cool or think I'm really crazy. But most people think it's really interesting.
Too many questions already.
Right.
All right. You sourced material. I didn't know that part. You sourced the material from the land?
Well, a lot of it, yeah.
You're like cutting down trees to build your cabin with?
So it was really kind of serendipitous. A couple of large oak trees fell down, a large hickory tree. So some big hardwoods fell.
Wow.
So I didn't cut any live trees down. So don't.
I'm not. I'm not. That wasn't the direction I was. It was in awe, not out of sadness for the trees. No.
So they had fallen down. And so there was like a lot of great wood, and so I thought, well, it's expensive to buy giant oak planks and oak beams, but if it's free, it's right here. It just takes time to process it and takes time to kind of put it up and let it dry. And so, but I started, and that's part of the first step was collecting a lot of this wood, letting it sit up in the barn for a couple of years, drying out, all that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, it takes a lot of time. You want to talk about processing an oak beam. I spent hundreds of hours on a chainsaw, right? Me and a chainsaw for a long time.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
There is no, I mean, I used to do some construction and stuff, and I had, I am so lazy. I can just think of the excuses that I would come up with. I would be year 4. I'd be like, the wood's probably not dry enough yet. Better give it a few more weeks. I would make up a zillion excuses.
Yeah, there were definitely days I had where it was like, I don't want to be doing this. Right? It wasn't. And so I kind of joke about it being not exactly fun the whole time, right? It was,
of course.
But now I love the fact that it's finished, and that's, and be able to like be comfortable and live there, and you're cooking yourself some dinner inside this really unique cabin. It's a lot of fun.
That's amazing.
But it's a pain. It was a long process, so yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but those are the rewarding parts, right? The bit of the painfulness. Do you notice when you're in the cabin? Do you notice like little areas that you messed up a little bit?
Oh yeah. And because I did all of it myself, like I can tell you about each piece and where each tree came from and all of that.
It's amazing.
But it's I constantly I'm like, I would have done it differently if I was doing it again, right? And I don't think I'm going to try to do it ever again in the same way I did. It was hard. And you have to think about the terms of just the labor. It takes a lot of work to lift a log. So you have to think about, if you're doing it yourself, how do you do that, right? You have to figure out pulley systems and ropes and try to lift up heavy wood and things because you're by yourself. So my brother did help. Yeah. I have a brother that came to help some, but a lot of it was just doing it by yourself.
Oh, you didn't do like the 6-pack and a friend move? Like,
I tried that. Like, hey, I've got a keg.
Old,
let's have a
right?
weekend. And
they stop answering your calls. Yeah.
Right.
Well, because you bill it as because I've seen people. I've seen there's this guy from my high school that's I don't know. I mostly follow him because out of concern. It seems like he's building some sort of militia.
Mm.
but he's a con too. He always has like a new con going.
Yeah.
And but I'll see him. He builds incredible stuff like that because I'll see him. He like puts a thing out on Facebook to people like, hey, come and get a workout doing this and that. Like he really sells it like a training.
Sure.
The personal training he's gonna do for you, just like
I'll help you out,
telling you how to build his house.
It's like CrossFit, but on the farm, and
exactly. That's the move. All right, so you make this might be just the cabin episode. I hope that we get to your research, but I'm not totally confident we're going to finish talking about your cabin in 90 minutes.
I think it's related. It's related.
Oh, we'll get to it, but I still, we're not done here. So you source, you go around collecting wood. You dry the wood. You got chainsaws going. You got pulley systems. Yep. That's okay. Hit me with something else. What else are you sourcing?
Rock. So it has a rock base. The whole bottom wall is big rocks that I had to dig out of the fields and gather up from the woods and whatnot. So
no basement.
No,
not because they don't like. Well, does Tennessee do basements? I know a lot of times in the South they don't. Yeah,
right. Yeah, a lot of crawl spaces, not always full basements, but there's some. But yeah, I mean that would have required excavation and that kind of stuff. And like I said, I didn't really. I was just going in with it as like a little cabin. Let's just kind of build something that'll get by.
What were the plan? Did you have anyone look at your plans or blueprints or anything? Did you have you had blueprints, right? Did you or what?
Sure. Yeah. Let's say that. Let's go with that. Yeah, for sure. No, and I definitely had some folks that I know that are some engineers and folks that work in civil engineering and stuff that took a look at it and see some of the specs on it and what it would take and all that kind of the angles and different things like that. But yeah, but then most of it, I mean, it's like I said, it's pretty simple stuff. I mean, there are definitely, where I work around the world, there's lots of people who have never had any kind of education and can't even read that are building their own accommodations, right? And I thought, well, out of solidarity, it's kind of an experiment, right? Is it that impossible for me to do it? I don't know. Is it what does it actually take to sort of build your own accommodation? And it takes a lot of time is what it comes down to. It takes a lot of time, it takes just a lot of labor. But I really wanted to know that. I wanted that firsthand experience to say that, yeah, I tried it. This is what it actually takes. This is what it feels like to be spending 100 hours on a chainsaw or whatever. Like I wanted to know what that was like so that, I could then, one hand, relate to other people that I'm working with. But also then someone asks, it's like, well, yeah, I did it. This is what it took for me. And I can give some really specifics about how that impacts, your lifestyle and what it takes to do that.
Wow. Okay. Well, my dream is to live in a cabin in the woods that you built. That I'm not touching it. I mean, that's that you have all the academic connections and can just walk into the engineering department and they must have nerded out over that. I said, sure. I use the word nerd on the show in only a complimentary way, of course. It's a science podcast, but that must have been a thrill for them.
Right. It's a different project, right? They might be thinking about plans about building some energy grid or some, large scale bridge or building. But then you come in with this like, hey, I've got this on the farm. I'm building a cabin. What do y'all think about it? And I think they kind of, I think it was fun, but at the same time, it's pretty simple for them. And so I think that was just kind of like, oh, this is cute. Look at this guy. He's doing a little clubhouse. And it's like, sure. But it was fun. I mean, and there people are very interested and people want to know what it's like and what it took, but it's really pretty just basic stuff. So
before we get into kind of some of your inspiration in cultures where something like this is commonplace, right. in terms of the perception when you start doing this, like if some people are going to think Unabomber,
totally, totally, yeah. Like, what's motivating this guy? Why would he want to do that? Right? What is this about? There's something wrong with him. Or, for sure. And I have colleagues that probably think I'm crazy. And, that's just a part of the game, I guess. You have to convince them that it's kind of just an experiment, and I just want to check it out and see. I mean, it's part of learning, I guess, and I think we can all relate to that. In the science academic community, it's just an experiment. We're just trying to learn from it.
So cool. Do you get many visitors?
Yeah, I mean, pre-COVID, a lot more, obviously, and we would have dinner on the farm or whatever, and we used to have chefs come out, and they would kind of do a farm dinner where they would prepare the food that we grew, and we always give people a little tour of the project and see if they're curious about what I'm doing down there and stuff like that. But now I live there full time, and so it's like, if you want to come over and see my house, it's fine.
Amazing. I can't wait. I'm going to come see your house when I pass through town. Yeah.
Well, it's funny because everybody always says, well, when you travel, you should just put it on Airbnb. And I'm like, right, I guess it could in the future, but it's still, I don't know, to the point where I think it would be very comfortable for people that have never been there. Like, it's kind of quirky. It takes some thinking about how things work. And
all the Airbnbs, I always, the first thing I do is I try to find the oddest ones that I can. If I can stay in a place that has a nice horseshoe collection on the wall, something like that. That's what I get down with. Yeah, yeah.
You'd like this one. This would be for you.
Oh yeah, I've stayed in tiny homes and stuff, and I'm all about that. Actually, last time I was through Knoxville, found an amazing stayed in a yurt situation.
Nice.
I'm always getting stuff like that.
Well, the fun part for me is just in terms of where I'm located is Knox County. I mean, East Tennessee is beautiful, but I can see the Smoky Mountain National Park from my bedroom window.
That's amazing.
Because I'm up on a little bit of a hill, and it looks just all the way across the valley, and so I can wake up and see the Smokies.
Well, I swear we'll get to your research, but this is before COVID, there was, things were kind of heading this direction where tiny houses were becoming a thing. People would be flexing their tiny house on Instagram. The minimalist thing. It was refreshing to see, as someone that I was born in 1980s, and I remember the lifestyles of the rich and famous and MTV Cribs and kind of ridiculous mentality that was the American dream at the time. That I thought it was refreshing to see people parsing the things down. As someone who spent 17 years living on the road, most of my belongings fit in a car, and then. But it was still, it seemed like kind of, a novelty and a little bit odd or whatever. And then COVID hit, and everyone's like, I need a cabin in the woods. Right. I'm actually surprised that we haven't run out of cabins in the woods already.
So I had to build my own for that reason,
So what was the response from all of the people that thought you were a lunatic pre-COVID? Were probably the tables turned a little bit. And I kind of had to smile about that, because it was very much the conversation that they used to tell me. You're young-ish. You have a job. You should be living in a place where there's a lot of other youngish people doing fun things, and much more of a social life. And these were people coming from large metropolitan areas in the U.S. I mean, for colleagues of mine and friends that are in L.A. or New York and places along those lines, a lot of D.C. folks. They'd say, why aren't you living in D.C.? And then they kind of, it was a little bit, just in jest, but they would say, you're kind of weird. Why would you want and choose to live out there? But then talking to them during COVID, there was a lot of mental health struggles with people being stuck in their studio apartment in New York, and they couldn't leave. And even if they could leave, there wasn't anything open anyways. And so all of the fun and the excitement and the glitz and glamour of the urban center kind of went away pretty quick. And I think, a lot of them were say I'm really suffering here. This is not fun. And I said, well, nothing's really changed for me. I just got back from a walk out in the forest, and I picked some vegetables for dinner, and it's pretty healthy in that sense. And so there was some back and forth about that. They can, I think, see more now some of the benefits to living, outside of an urban center. But I think we've seen that in terms of just as in the U.S., there's a lot of changes to where people are living, and
the housing market changes and where people want to live and what's become valuable as people are thinking about working remotely, and lifestyle is important. So I think a lot of people are shifting the way they think about it for sure. And I know I've had those conversations with people.
Plus, with the availability of the internet and everything,
Right.
which unless you're recording this incredibly important podcast, generally you're able to stay in contact with it and get whatever service that you need. You were on a generator yesterday. What's the like? I don't know if I can convey how lazy I am to you. I like if sometimes I'll be on the couch, and if there's not a power outlet that I can reach, then I guess the phone's gonna die. I guess it's and what's the electricity situation in your place?
Right. And so that's essentially, it's always, how do you charge your things that you need to use, right? Your laptops, your devices, your phones, and their battery. I mean, it's just a matter of charging them. Right. And so, I mean, I kind of equate it to working in a lot of places where we work, where we've gone through this sort of development process where, rural villages didn't get the roadways, they didn't get the telegraph lines, they didn't get the landline phones. That was a long process where we put those lines out to rural communities in the U.S. because that's the technology that we had. And so we funded these lines out. And so when, you're from the 80s, when the internet started, it was dial up, and I don't know, you probably remember that. And you had to be connected to a landline, right? Mm-hmm. But now we don't need that, right? It's easy to put up a cell phone tower in some remote area. And so you don't necessarily need all of that infrastructure. You just need some way to charge your phone now. And that's done really easily with a little solar panel and a car battery, right? And you can charge all kinds of stuff off of a car battery that's charged by a solar panel. And so the technology is available that it's very easy to not have to worry about how to charge your phone and your laptop. Like, that's pretty easy to do. And if it's a matter of like having a bunch of lights on and things, I mean, there's simple generators that you can get that when you need it to be on, you can have it on. If you just need to charge batteries for a little bit, charge batteries, or use a solar panel, or all these other alternative options out there. It's some of the larger things that in Tennessee we would think about. In Wisconsin you would think about, like things like heat and HVAC systems, and a lot of that we use. Generally we use like a lot of electricity for, right? So like, obviously I don't have air conditioning in my cabin. I don't have an HVAC system. I have a wood stove. So in the wintertime I have to use firewood. You can cook on it. You also can use it to heat your house. It's a pretty small space, so it's pretty easy to heat up a pretty small space. And so there isn't really that. If I really start thinking about it, I don't really have that much need for electricity, right? Obviously, it gets darker earlier in the wintertime, so you want some lights on. But there's also like point of use. So I don't need to light up the entire house when I'm just sitting reading a book. All I need is that light right there on the book, right? And there's so many different ways to accomplish that. Right, from battery-powered lights to just small LED style. I mean, that are run-off panels. I mean, it's not that complicated anymore to set this up. So I don't. It helps you reevaluate how much electricity you really do need.
Interesting.
To me, it's not that much. I think the biggest complaint that people have, besides sort of like an HVAC system, is fridge and freezers. People are always concerned about having a freezer. And I don't have a freezer. I don't have anything frozen at my house. So if I really want ice, I'd have to go buy a bag of ice and use a cooler. But once again, there's refrigerated coolers that you can get. There are small mini-sized freezers that you can get that can be charged and be run off batteries if you want. I just haven't really got to the point where I need it or care.
So you don't have a refrigerator?
I do not, no.
Oh man, I just tapped out. Of this deal. No refrigerator. Wait, what? Okay.
I mean, what do we use with refrigerators for? Like leftovers,
Good
right?
question.
We'll just cook what you're going to eat, and that's it, right? Then you don't need a refrigerator unless you want to. I don't eat ice cream either. Like, I'm just not a big ice cream fan, and so like I don't use frozen dishes. I cook my food that I harvest. So
yeah,
it's like it would just be for leftovers, really. And it's like, well, don't make leftovers, right? That's a pretty simple solution. Or, have a dog that'll eat it, or pigs, or a chicken, or a compost pile. I mean, when we talk about waste, when we say food waste, we're mostly referring to it's not good for people anymore. But it's good for so many other things. So what? It's not good for people. It's good for the worms. It's good for the chickens. It's good for the pigs.
What do you got? You got some critters?
Oh, yeah. We definitely chickens and ducks and sheep. And
awesome. I'm back on board. So. Maybe I don't need a refrigerator that much. Interesting.
Right? Fresh eggs with some fresh spinach. What do you...
So
you don't need to refrigerate eggs. You don't need to refrigerate butter.
Incredible. I stayed in this place in Jamaica for a bit, where it was incredible. It was a small home, and most of it was made out of cinder blocks, like kind of like decorated cinder blocks or whatever. It's beautiful. So it was all it was all like open. You could see through every wall. The bedroom was wood, so you could close it and everything, but everything else was open. It was on the beach. It was absolutely incredible, and it was like, I feel like I could live here forever. And then you like, I don't know how much I like sleeping under a mosquito net. And do you have some days where you're like, I'm missing a few, like you miss central air what's the heat situation?
I have a fireplace, a little wood stove.
All right.
So I'm not that particularly concerned with being cold. I prefer the heat over the cold anyways. So, like summertime, like I have a battery powered fan that puts out a lot of wind. I mean, so if I really need a fan, that's fine. That's easy to do. I don't really need air conditioning. And besides, I mean, I have really thick walls. It's really the thermal value of my walls is pretty good. And so, and it's shaded because I have trees around me. I'm in the woods. And so if I were to like keep my windows closed and things in the summertime, it maintains about 65 degrees in my house. So it's not hot. It's not like swelteringly hot or anything in there. It's really pretty calm and, pretty good climate inside the house. So it's not a problem for me. I mean, it's not for everybody. That's the other part about it. A lot of people would never choose to live in that way. But it's quiet, right? I don't have any neighbors that I can see from my house. It's very quiet. The only neighbors I have are the critters that live in the forest. And people wonder, that's kind of one of the comments I'll get is like, aren't you worried about the critters in the forest? And I'm like, I know what's there. Right? I know who lives in the forest. I know what's there. There's a lot of squirrels. There's a lot of possum, right? I don't have any bear. I have very few deer, some occasional skunk, occasional raccoon. So it's not that complicated. There's nothing there that's going to get me, right? I'm not afraid of anything in the woods because there's nothing there that's going to hurt me. I'm not food for anything in the forest.
Yeah.
So
that's a selling point.
It's very quiet. It's very peaceful in that sense. So
wonderful. I think we're going to have. I wonder. I bet 3 people listening or watching this. I bet 3 people 10 years from now they live in a cabin in the woods because they heard this. It's inspiring. I feel like
I have nothing but positive things to say about it. It's very simple. It didn't really cost me that much to build. You can always add more and more luxurious items to it if you really want to. It can be more comfortable as you go if you really want to. And the reason I don't have a fridge is because I just haven't put the effort into getting one. It's not that it's impossible. There's propane fridges. There's fridges that run a very low electrical requirements. There's stuff for sailboats. There's stuff for small, tiny homes. I mean, the appliances and the technology is out there for sure. I'm just busy. I have a job, right? Like I just haven't really gotten to that point where I'm, working on that. I'll get there, just not yet.
What's the clothes situation? You got a washboard or what?
Sure, you can always do it that way. I mean, that's why that's why laundromats exist, right? Not everybody, even in cities, not everybody has a washer and dryer.
You go to laundromat?
Sure, or go to my family's house where they let you do it for free.
I see. I had really fanciful images of you using a washboard, old school.
I do have one, but yeah, I don't have enough time for that.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get into your background. And believe it or not, audience, this is actually like it's related.
It is, yeah.
It's all related. So yeah, tell people about yourself, your background,
Sure.
how you got into. I'll let you go.
Sure. So I work a lot in the sort of realm of what you might call food systems. It's more of a more recent term, I suppose. It really, on the very like basic level, there's a lot of people in the world right now, and I don't have to know anything about you as a person to know that you need certain things to continue to exist as a person, right? I don't need to know anything about you, any sort of social category that you can come up with. I don't need to know any of that. If I know that you're a human being and that you want to continue to stay alive, right? You have to breathe. You need clean air, right? You need water because you're mostly water, so you need to replenish that water. And you have to have nutrients, and they have to be specific kinds of nutrients in order for you to reproduce your cells, right? And that's really the basis of a lot of the work that we're doing. Is how do we make sure that people have those basic things, right? It doesn't matter what religion you are or whatever you believe. It doesn't matter anything about that. It doesn't matter where you come from or what country your ancestors came from or whatever. That's nothing to do with it. That's kind of further along the conversation. But I know that you need certain things to survive, and that you have to do that regularly, right? That you can't go too many days without taking in more water or taking in more nutrients, because then you won't survive. And so that's sort of the basis of it. And so then you start to examine, well, what does that mean for all of us on the planet, right? Where are we at? And you just start to look at kind of where we're at with those basic things. And well, we're not doing great in the sense that there's a lot of people everywhere. Now, we're not just talking about some far away places, but everywhere in every country, there are people that have a lot less food or nutrients available to them than other people. Right. And so there's inherently this inequality that exists. Now, whether it's just in access or quality or quantity, right, you can start to analyze this in a lot of different ways. But that's sort of just the basis of where we're at. And I kind of got involved because I was just growing up very interested in different cultural differences in food. I was very interested in the ways that people around the world grow and eat and create these wonderful dishes. And I'm just a forest boy from Appalachia, and I just wanted to see what else was out there. So any opportunities that I could find to go abroad and to learn about what was happening and what it was like there. I wanted to taste the food. I wanted to eat the insects and see what that was like instead of just reading about it in magazines or whatever. Like, I wanted to experience that. And I did. And I realized I learned a lot, all right, along the way. And I realized that some of those what I thought of as a young kid would be really, really hard to do, right? Oh, living in a mud hut would be really hard. And, eating an insect or eating a snake would be really terrible. But now that I've done things like that and I've realized that physical part isn't that hard, right? Using an outhouse, it's not that big deal. When I was in the Peace Corps, I lived in Zambia, a very rural area. We had an outhouse. So everybody had the little out. If you were lucky, you had an outhouse. A lot of people just walked out into the bush and used that as their toilet, right? But some people had outhouses, little latrines. You dig a pit, you build a little structure on top. Very simple process, and that's what people used. And a lot of my friends would say, "How did you stand that? How did you survive?" And it's like that wasn't the challenge. The challenge was a lot of the sort of social, educational, political differences, and seeing some of those inequalities being reproduced by some of these social and political situations. That was some of the harder part to deal with. Seeing your neighbors that are helping to take care of you, seeing them go hungry during the hungry season, and knowing that all of your family and friends in the US are gorging themselves on Thanksgiving dinner, right? And knowing that those two things are happening at exactly the same time for people that you care about, right? I care about my neighbors in Zambia, but I was also cared about my family and friends, and just knowing that they're in very different situations in that exact same moment, right? That was some of the harder things to try to work out emotionally and mentally. But using a latrine as a bathroom is really easy. You get used to it really quickly. So it's sort of those kinds of things that you learn. And so as I was going, I came back to the US. I ended up at Penn State University, a PhD program there, really looking at rural development, trying to understand, just like, once again, back to these really basic stuff. How do we make sure that everybody has enough food? We generally call that food security. Are people secure in the amount of food that they have, right? And is it enough quantity-wise? Is it enough quality-wise? Is it appropriate food for your age range, right? So like one of the things we could ask is, obviously people need food to survive, but do all people need the same food at the same times? Well, no, we're different, right? 80-year-olds need different types of foods than 8-month-olds, right? 8-month-olds are going through different transitions than 80-year-olds. And so you get down into some of the details about what people might need and when they might need it, and for what purpose. And so there's a lot of conversations that could be had about this. But that's the reality, is that we have these needs as people, and how do we satisfy those nutrient requirements that we need? Is it just calories? Are we talking about just basic energy, just carbs, carbohydrate, calories? Are we talking about proteins? Are we talking about certain micronutrients? Is it a vitamin A deficiency? Is it a zinc deficiency? What are those things that we need? And there's so many examples of this that you could point out. Like a relatively recent example that I like to use in class sometimes is about and there was a tsunami in Japan in 2011. Knocked out the Fukushima nuclear reactor there, had a lot of problems with radiation into the ocean. Well, okay, great. But at the same time, that had an impact. I mean, it's not a great story, but it's like, that's terrible. Yeah. But at the same time, what you don't realize is that then the price of iodine goes up, because iodine pills are supposed to help with radiation sickness or prevent you from getting radiation poisoning. And so the price of iodine changes. So then you have a poor country like Cambodia who never had iodized salt. And in their salt flats, they collect water out of the ocean, they dry it, they take the salt, and that's their table salt. But it was never iodized, and so they had a lot of iodine deficiency in their diet. Well, then, different organizations came in, they bought them these potassium iodate sprayers, and they would spray these big piles of salt, and it would become iodized. And that would then give the whole population a little bit of iodine. And so that, it's an essential nutrient that they need to develop. Children need it for the brains to develop, all those kinds of things. And so now all of a sudden, because there's an earthquake thousands of miles away that has no real connection to Cambodia, the price of iodine goes up. They can't afford to iodate their salt anymore. So now you have an iodine deficiency in children again, because there isn't iodine in the salt in the market. And so people aren't consuming it, right? And so there's this strung out knock-on effect that happens. And that's sort of the essential part of these conversations when you talk about One Health. It's saying these things are much larger systems than we've traditionally thought about. And so we have to consider these sort of really long supply chains and these really complex systems where something way far away happens, and that has these knockoff effects and affect people in very different circumstances that we would never put those ideas together, but they're connected, and we have to understand how do we then address that. Yeah, so it's these kinds of ideas, and that's what we work on a lot here at the university and other universities. I mean, we are trying to have the supply chain engineers thinking about these supply chains, also thinking about, the people with nutrition, thinking about, well, what are the nutrients that are needed, and people in food science talking about how do you apply that and get that into diets of people. And so you have these different people in different departments focusing on very different topics that happen to be related. And how do you get them into a room together? How do you get the public to understand that we're talking about these much larger, more complex ideas? And so that's the sort of day-to-day job that we're doing here at the university.
And that's kind of the gist of
Right.
One Health, the One
Right.
Health initiative, and with also, and it doesn't seem like maybe as much a part of your work, but it seems like the One Health initiative has quite a bit of emphasis on zoonosis and
Yep.
disease and
Right.
human impact and on and biodiversity's loss.
Absolutely.
Biodiversity losses impact on disease spread and that sort of thing. We just did I have another podcast called Mind Under Matter. It's a comedy podcast, but I'm always blabbing about science that ends up being a big part of the show too. And we just did a St. Patrick's Day episode, and I was looking through a little bit of the history, and then and it's actually the national holiday that's celebrated in more nations than like any other country's national holiday. Everyone celebrates St. Patrick's Day, but I found myself looking into the potato famine a little bit, which I had heard about brief. I think the Michael Pollan's The Botany of Desire years and years ago or whatever. And that was when you kind of talked about like, okay, are we just do we just need enough calories to survive? That was an aspect of it that I hadn't realized was there was essential vitamins that you couldn't just substitute by just throwing a bunch of corn at the problem or
exactly.
Whatever. And
potatoes the same way. I mean, potatoes will fill your belly, but they lack certain things that you might need.
Mm-hmm.
And that differs. Like we said, it differs who you are. I mean, where are you living, right? I mean, if you're living in a hot climate and there's the tropics, maybe you don't need as much calories to stay warm versus someone who's living, towards the Arctic, for example.
And
what's available to you, right? Because then people will get into some of the cultural issues, right? Like I can grow loads and loads of beets, but if I just brought a whole bunch of beets to hungry students at the campus and said, hey, there's some students that need some food. And you brought a whole pile of beets to them. That's not going to solve the problem, right? They don't have a place to cook it. They don't know how to cook it. They've never eaten it before. They're not interested in eating it. And so is it technically it could be part of a solution, but it may not really be that important to do that because it might not work at all. Because there's all these other factors that go into whether someone's going to actually eat what it is that's available to them.
Yeah, you aren't just not solving the problem, you're also not being invited back to the parties anymore.
Right.
Just showing you the beat guy. Like, does he do that every time? Yep, every time. Buckets of beets everywhere.
Buckets of beets.
Don't invite them unless you're low on beets.
Right.
We've had entomologists on the show talking about one of the episodes. In particular, I had 2 entomologists and a person who has Brooklyn bugs in so bad with names, but anyway, a really terrific episode that I recommend viewers go back and listen to. But the guy's whole mission is to get people into eating insects. I'll send you some pictures of this afterwards. But if listeners go on Instagram or something to Brooklyn Bugs, you see the dishes that he's making with insects in them, and it's like high end. Like very ritzy culinary stuff that you probably wouldn't even know had insects on it if no one told you. But the as an American, typically some or at least from being from the Midwest, I would have a difficult time selling the people that I knew from the same area that hadn't traveled much or been outside of it on the idea of making a meal out of insects.
Right.
Whereas in many areas, it's certainly not uncommon to have that. Or I had Herman Poncer from Duke University on recently. He wrote a book called Burn about the evolution of human metabolism and studies the Hansa people. We'll say that. Let's just go with it. And we were talking about, they'll come across a hive and jackpot, now they get honey and risking life and limb to climb all the way up and grab this beehive and toss it down. And they're scooping up. You can see there's David Attenborough documentaries where you can see this happening. They're just, they don't even bother like smoking the bees out or anything, just scooping. Can't wait to, but he was telling me, they'll just eat bowls of honey as a meal and not just as a meal, but just like, what a great day this was. I got to eat 3 bowls of honey today
with little insect bits in it mixed in, right?
Yeah, but you try to take that somewhere else, and it's whereas maybe those I'm sure there's a lot of American food that they would happily adapt to, but I don't know. You offer someone a Big Mac and maybe. Instead of their bowl of honey, and maybe they're like, oh, I couldn't touch that thing.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, we're not culturally, North America is not so into insects, right? And that's changing. I think that we're seeing a lot more products being made. It's a lot easier for people to stomach cricket powder as like a protein supplement in their smoothie or in their energy bars or whatever they have for their workout. It's easier for them to stomach the fact that it's like proteins coming from crickets, which are they're producing now industrially in old warehouses and things, and sort of concentrated small areas, using other agricultural waste and things. So once again, it's part of this larger system, because even cricket waste, often referred to as frass, right? It's insect waste that can be used in soil as a soil amendment, as like worm castings. I mean, these are things that people add to the soil as a good nutrients for your soil. Yeah. So there isn't waste, right? The concept of that we have waste, we have to figure out better ways of putting it into a larger sort of circular economy where everything has value. It's just figuring out where it needs to go and who can use it and what can use it and how do we use it, right? And so that's part of this whole challenge, and it's fun. I mean, it's an interesting challenge. It's just the fact that it's addressing a serious need where there are people that don't have enough food, right? They're not to the point where they're comfortable with tomorrow. They know that they're going to have meals, and it's not just because they're refugees in some camp somewhere. It's because where they live, there's a very limited supply of high quality, nutritious foods for them. So it's thinking about that. So it's a fun, interesting kind of intellectual challenge, but the reality is it's a very serious thing that's connected to real people's lives and their futures. So we do have to take it serious, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, cool. How can we grow crickets in this old warehouse, and what kind of cool meals can we come up with cricket powder that's going to be part of people's diets in the future? It's harder for Americans to just like see a water beetle or something and just eat it directly. Yeah. But they can be tasty. I mean, if you think about like the cicadas last summer here, they had the big, cicada boom and that year. And a lot of people were talking about what kinds of things could you make from a cicada? Could you eat it? Do you roast it? Can you saute it? A lot of people were very squeamish about it, but other people really took it to heart and thought about how you could eat this protein-rich source of natural food that just comes up out of the ground every few years.
Also, there's psilocybin in cicadas too.
I've heard that too. Yeah. Maybe another motivating factor for people, I'm sure.
Well, that's the thing. You need to find it. From my perspective, you need to find inventive way. It's the barrier isn't the mouth, it's the sensibilities. It's the in culture's impact on that. I told the Brooklyn Bug guy who's trying to make all these wonderful dishes, and you're in Brooklyn, and I'm sure lots of if you're in Brooklyn, this is like, oh cool, we can go in this fancy restaurant and eat insects, but your average population, I was like, you say the protein powder, that's how you do it, because the wellness people, you give them something like weird sounding, they think it works better because they discovered it themselves, they're in on this other thing that they can tell people about, like, oh well, how'd I get jacked? Well, it was the cricket powder or whatever.
Right.
That's so there's like a zillion different ways to sell people on things, because it's you never I was talking with I was saying beforehand, I was talking with Robert Sapolsky recently, but he shared a story, or maybe it was someone else shared a story. There was an anthropologist hanging out with these hunter-gatherers, and they're all walking around barefoot and stuff. This is decades ago, and so they have the bright idea, because they're friends with these people. Like, you know what, gonna help my friends out in this tribe. I'm gonna gift them shoes, and so brings all these shoes. Well, what did they do? They tied them around their waist so everyone could see that they had shoes. You didn't want like if they're on their feet, people might not notice these fancy shoes.
It might get dirty if they're on the ground, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. And I just came from pickleball this morning. There's this older woman there that used to do a bit of science. So we were talking one day. She was saying, she was saying how she did some I forget if it was Peace Corps or something, but a similar thing where it was in like Iraq or the Middle East somewhere where the U.S. was going in and just trying to build things all new from scratch in the American likeness, and she was like, "No, we need to make use of what we have now." And they're like, "Well, I don't know. Over here, they're really speaking of refrigerators." She goes, "They're loving these refrigerators. They can't get enough of them. We keep sending refrigerators. They keep asking for more." And she's like, "But they don't have electricity there. So she went down to find out. They liked the boxes that the refrigerators were in. So it's this is like this idea of well-meaning altruism and trying to, but it's I've heard the idea of effective altruism being thrown around more here and there, and like where is the money actually going? When I think a lot of people are privy to the idea now of like, well, certain charity organizations, 90% of it is going to pay the staff or whatever, 10% of it actually gets to the people that need it or whatever they're proposing that they're doing. And so people are kind of aware of that, but I don't think people are as aware of like just the numerous blind spots that we have in trying to help out other cultures.
Well, this perfect example is when, like, living in the village in Zambia, there was an organization, nonprofit that learned of the need for example, to have outhouses, to have latrines, because if you're just defecating in the forest, flies land on that and then fly over to your food, and little kids now have some sort of contamination of a pathogen. And so you're getting people sick that way. The risk is there. So it's less risky if you do your business in a hole in the ground and it's covered. And so there was this idea that, it's not that much of an investment to build latrines. So let's send money out, and we'll start with the headman of the village, because if someone in a position of power or position of status, we want people to see that, so that they then will copy that, right? It's like, take the leader, the someone that people look up to, have them do it and model that behavior. And so they built, I think in every little village of the headman, they built this nice latrines, concrete with bricks and a nice metal roof and a door that has a little latch on it, right? A door that would close and it would seal up this little outhouse. And so because I lived there, they asked me to kind of go around to villages and see the progress of that. What's the status of our latrines that we're building, or program that we have? And I said, well, the latrines are built and they're very, very nice. And they said, that's great. We're successful. And I said, but you didn't ask the question about, is anybody defecating in the latrine? And they said, well, of course they are. I said, but of course they're not. I said, people are using these buildings to store their seeds, to store their fertilizers, to store their chemicals, because it's a waterproof, protected place that they can keep all of the animals and little children away from. They can lock the door, right? They said, this is a great little storage shed. All they did was put a little hole. They covered up the hole in the floor so nothing would fall down. And it's a beautiful little shed. I said, so they're being used, but they're just not being used for the purpose that you intended. And that's where those blind spots come in. And so there was an impact. Like, there was probably a benefit in terms of survivability of the seeds for next year's planting, the survivability of some of their grain, sacks full of grain, so that they were going to eat. So they probably had an impact on their food security in the long term, but it didn't have the impact in the public health sort of sanitation program that they wanted. Right?
It
happens a lot.
Dumb question for you.
Go ahead.
I get stuff stuck in my head sometimes, and it's just going to bother me if I don't know. How deep is this outhouse hole? What are we talking?
So where I lived in Zambia, it was probably maybe 10 feet to the bottom.
10 feet. All right.
Yeah, wasn't far.
Okay. Huh.
Yeah.
All
wasn't
right.
too bad.
Well, you throw like a little sawdust or something down there over things, or
you don't even need to necessarily over time. You could ashes. Generally, it's ash because you have leftover ashes from fires and things. So it's easier to just put your ashes down, and that helps neutralize it.
Yeah. Well, when you were talking about waste earlier, it's just it is that idea that nothing is waste potentially, but we do treat a lot of things as waste, and it is really difficult to who did I have on for the Body Farm episode that the One Health episode? I'm so bad with names. 3 months from now, I'm going to be struggling to remember your name. You're going to be cabin guy who wears the suit.
Fair.
I'll speak highly of you, but it won't have a name attached to it. Anyway, wonderful guest. Talk about the Body Farm and what happens to body when it decomposes naturally out in the wild, and it's just you're a forest guy. I know you're just a big fan of forests. You live in the forest. I know just from our bit of conversation yesterday, and you have 4.6 billion years of life on the planet, but plants and stuff, what do we got? Like 1 billion something years.
Right.
And you have everything has found its little niche, and it's everything this symbiotic relationship, and nothing goes to waste, and this thing craps somewhere and something else eats it. This thing dies over here, and a bunch of things and worms eat it.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
then you have agriculture take off, and then the spread of human population starting agriculture around 20,000 years ago, really making an impact shortly after that. And then the spread of humans, and now modern cities, and we are, that's a sliver of time by evolution's standards. And so there is a lot of what we talk about radioactive, spills or whatever. There's just the Ukraine shelling of there's the radioactive, the nuclear power plant, the reactor scare there. And this is something that, takes thousands of years for evolution to naturally kind of, for some critter or some species to make use of and figure out some way to monopolize this radioactive waste or whatever. So if it's the case that, say, I happen to care about my life and the humans that live on this planet, while I happen to exist here, in the maybe 40 more years that I get, it's going to require quite a bit of human initiative to sort out what to do with all this new modern waste that evolution never saw coming.
Right. Yeah. It's one of the big questions we have. Right. And the thing about it is, it's hard to get public buy-in sometimes, because in order to come up with some solutions, you do need people to be very specifically addressing maybe a very tiny, what seems to be a very tiny factor in this much larger issue. And so I have, neighbors and folks that I know that maybe have not been connected to a university and don't know much about the research side of things. And we'll say, why do we have people studying, the mating behavior of this tiny little beetle? Like, what relevancy does that have? And why should the public be funding that at a public university? And you say, well, the reality is, because maybe that tiny little beetle, we want to be able to interrupt its life cycle, because it's a major pest for this particular crop that goes to feed people or animals that then go to feed people. Right. And so if we were able to change this and figure out a way to biologically kind of control the life cycle of this one insect, it might mean the lives of, thousands of children in X country. Mm-hmm. And it's being able to put that together in a coherent argument and a statement, and people seeing that and go, oh, okay, I understand that we're trying to solve this much bigger problem over here. And it's going to require these different questions and laboratory assessments and experiments and to get to this larger, we need all those people doing these things to get to this larger solution to some of these, what we might have called like wicked problems, these larger, very complex issues that apply to all of us, right? It's not just some tiny community somewhere that's dealing with this problem. We're trying to provide health and well-being for everyone, right? And we agreed as nation states around the world, we all kind of came together decades ago and agreed that we would, share in goals, share in some of these common goals for humanity, and that we will attempt to try to reduce hunger, get rid of poverty. We will try to help have quality education for everyone so that everyone can participate. We will try to have a useful and efficient economy. We'll have a sustainable infrastructure for transportation. I mean, we have these large goals that we've come up with as a world community, and we have indicators to follow them and try to measure them. But we happen to need all of these different entities and research institutes and scientists to look at some of these things, and because it all applies to these larger questions of how we're going to survive as a species. And I think our discourse is often kind of confused. You'll hear people talk about, we've got to save the planet as if somehow the planet's going to blow up, right? Well, the planet itself is orbiting in space isn't at risk of it blowing up anytime soon. It's our ability to maintain a healthy lifestyle is what we're concerned about. Will humans be able to survive to the degree that we are now? I mean, we have these huge cities and communities all over the world, and we're doing it. We're surviving, but are we doing it well enough? Right? And is everybody in the same situation? Well, no. We all know that there's inequality. There's a lot of differences in the way we survive. So how do we address that? Right? What is it that we can do to address these things? We have to be able to think about it complex. You have to be able to understand all of the different factors that might go into it. But then we need people to study those factors and to come up with the next set of best practices to try to help solve some of these big challenges. I don't know. Some people, they don't think that's some people have a really negative view that we're too far gone. There's no use. I don't care. I'm not going to put in any effort. I'm just going to think about my own self or my own little community. That's fine. But, I think the pandemic helped highlight that we're all connected in a lot of ways, more so than we wanted to believe or more so than we thought before. But, even just, a small farmer, it's growing soybeans in middle America, those prices are dictated by what's going on all over the world, not just that small farming community. So just helping people realize that the world's a large place, that we're all humans. We have the same basic needs. How do we go about addressing that?
Yeah. I mean, there's a frustrating amount of personal incredulity where anything that is complex is it's very easy. It's easier just to write off as not important if things are complex. Listen, I get it. I deal with like computer stuff all the time, and there's like some new social media thing that I'm supposed to learn for my career or some stupid thing like that. I'm like, no, I'm not going to. And then my career falls apart because I'm not keeping up with whatever the new hip thing is or whatever. And we all do this. And so it's easy for me to criticize when I love nerding out about like all of my, first of all, it's wonderful to hear it. Well, I already knew it, but it's wonderful for the listener to hear that my vast knowledge of insect phalluses, which I do have, is not going to waste. It's not just some peculiar little hobby. I'm saving the planet.
Absolutely.
I think that if anything, what I've loved about doing these One Health episodes is that at least, even if people hear this complexity and are incredulous, they can at least be like, all right, that's complicated. Let's just here. What do you need? Just all right. Do your thing. It sounds like it's important, which is a lot better than there is straight up like a war against science. So like the idea of I mean, you brought up the why would we need beetle mating research or what? And I hear stuff like that. When I blab about science, I see people's eyes roll back in their heads all the time, and I've had people that I respect that are intelligent people get furious when they hear about a scientist intentionally lost 17,000 wallets around the world, and this was funded by this and that thing. Like, listen to the episode. There's way more to it going on than that. You have no idea the insights that were gained from it, and it actually infused money back into communities and all these other things in the process that you wouldn't think of, and you see people love. You know, Sarah Palin or something will get a hold of one of these studies of we're spending $25,000 on it. Like,
I know.
And you hear that number and you're like, you're mad that they're spending 25. I'm mad that it's not $250,000 that they're spending on that. I'm mad that they're only. I still to this day, I'm furious. I had this episode. There's this woman I had on again. No chance I remember her name, but it was impactful. She studied hearing cells. I've mentioned it several times on the show since. Hair cells for hearing in fish. And years ago, University of Vancouver, Washington, Vancouver. And trying to figure out fish hair cells. Listeners, don't get distracted that they're called hair cells. Why someone named them that it doesn't matter. They look like hairs. They're not hair. Scientists just like to confuse us sometimes in the naming of things. They regenerate. Fish hair cells regenerate. They have. Some loud thing happens or age or whatever happens underwater and these hair cells die off. They regenerate in fish. And humans, you go to whatever, that Guns N' Roses reunion tour or whatever, because you remember liking loud music when you were 12 and now you're 41 and realizing, oh, I actually don't like loud music that much anymore. But too late, you've lost a bunch of hair cells. And how do you figure out how these fish are regenerating their hair cells? Right. What can you do to maybe flip on a gene or something like that to change it to regenerate human hearing? And incredible, deafness gone. She has like $8,000 a year in funding for this project to solve deafness. $8,000 a year.
It's like some departments spend that on sandwiches for like a luncheon. It's not a lot of money, which is why it's hats off to some of these really dedicated people that for very small funds are working long hours to try to solve some of these questions. And the reality is, and some of them, I think I tell people to ask questions. A lot of people that do research love to talk about what they're doing. And so I tell them, well, if you're that skeptical, why don't you ask them and continue to ask questions about it? And they should be able to explain it to you and explain how it connects to these larger issues. I have met folks that are like very in their lab and they can tell you the importance of their work to a point. And then they said, look, I don't know, I'm doing this. It goes beyond me. I'm not exactly sure how it all connects to these larger challenges, but I know that it does to some extent. I'm contributing towards that. Great, right? Like that's making some effort. But you're hoping that people that are trying to do some of these things would have $80,000 a year.
Yeah.
$800,000 a year, right? And so, because we do spend a lot of money on stuff that's not that helpful for us as a species, right? And so, could we maybe spend a little bit more on things that are some research that's trying to help? It's funny because people, we ask these sort of hypothetical questions about what would you do if you won $1 million? And I bet if you asked, I didn't do this survey, but I bet if you surveyed a bunch of academics and you asked them like, what would you do if you won $1 billion and you never had to work again? I bet a lot of them would say that they would continue to do the research that they're doing. They just wouldn't have to worry about funding it, right? Because it's not something that people aren't doing it to get rich and famous, right? They're doing it because they want to answer some questions that they have. They want to study this particular tree or organism or forest or community or economy or whatever. And so they're curious. They want to do that. And I think a lot of people would continue to do that. It's just a matter of like, why aren't we funding them more? It's good, serious work that they're doing.
Yeah. I think a lot of people listen to this show and appreciate getting to hear about stuff that they wouldn't normally get to hear about. But we even have we have a range of listeners from all sorts of backgrounds, ages, some scientists listen, some people who have never gone to college listen, and everything in between. And from this, I know I've had people write me because they are a grad student and get inspired by certain things, or they stumbled on this early on in college and helped navigate what they wanted to research, whatever else. I'm curious about your experience with the Peace Corps, because it seems like, first off, is there an age limit for joining the Peace Corps?
No. And there's factors, people that retire and just go in to be volunteers for the Peace Corps, and that's kind of the retirement plan. Most of people are, post college, sort of 20s, early 30s. I think it's changing. I mean, now that we have much more digital tools and things, it's a little bit different. I think it's like it used to be pre-internet. When I applied, you just sent in your application by mail and said you pick a region of where you might want to go. So you rank order them, and I had Sub-Saharan Africa on there as where I wanted to go, and they invited me to a program on food and agricultural issues in Zambia. And I said, great, Zambia, I don't know much about it, but I'm into it. And so I went for it. But they nowadays you can look specifically at programs in countries, and you can apply for a specific country and a particular type of, like if you want to work on health issues or you want to work on education issues or whatever that is, you can look it up. During the pandemic, there wasn't anybody doing anything. I mean, they had to close down like a lot of the government programs. But I think from what I hear, they're back up and running and looking to recruit people and send people out. But I recommend people looking into it, programs like that. I mean, there's lots of different programs out there, but I feel like it's a good way to just experience things that you wouldn't necessarily get to experience otherwise. It's different than going on holiday somewhere. It's different than doing a study abroad for 2 weeks or a month, where you're embedded with certain institutions or universities or whatever. This is much more of we're going to get you out into a community. You're going to live there and stay there for an extended period of time, learn the local language, learn about the local culture. We want you to be a good ambassador for the U.S., much more like a diplomatic type of a goal. And so in that sense, it gives you gives Americans a sense to live there on the ground and gain from that and learn about people, so that when you come back, right, and you're working in a job that you're working in, you can always tell people, right? So I'm always talking to students about what I learned by living in Zambia. I doubt the Zambians talk about me. I don't think they gain much from my experience, from my presence there, but I'm certainly still talking about the things that I learned and how it impacted my choices in life. And so I feel like that's probably true for a lot of people. And like every program, there's a lot of, people disagree. There's people that don't think that government should be funding this kind of work. And other people said they should be funding more of this type of work. And so there's a lot of different perspectives out there. And I think that that's part of our role as research scientists is to ask some of those questions and say, well, what kind of data could we actually get to show and measure the impact that these kinds of programs are having, right? What would we need to do in a scientific way to have the data, sufficient data, enough quality and quantity of data to make a legitimate analysis and come up with some recommendations of how to improve a program? right? It's real easy to criticize. It's a lot harder to be constructive in your criticism and come up with possible suggestions, right? Like it's easy to say, oh, I disagree with that whole program. Well, okay, but what would you do? What are some suggestions of how you might change it, right? That's a lot harder for people to come up with. So I kind of say that to people. Look, I'm interested that you want to criticize. That's great. Criticize all you want, but like, I'm not really going to listen that much until you come up with like an alternative. Like you can say it's bad, but like, what would be a solution for you? What would be some sort of recommendation? Let's get into what are the actual changes that you want to see? Because it's really easy to say you don't like something and something's bad or whatever, but how do you improve on it? And that's not always something that people do.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all get little glimpses of the importance of this. Where I remember before I had traveled or done anything, I worked 3 years in a furniture factory even, and just knowing, you start just on a machine doing this one job, edge foiler. You're just putting the like fake paint on the edge of some piece, and you learn this machine really well, and it's got like little imperfections, but you're getting paid by the amount you crank out. So you're like, yeah, I'll let that one pass, good enough. And then one day you go and work on the assembly line to pick up some extra hours or whatever. And then you see that piece in the assembled full product and you go, oh, I have been delivering some real garbage. And now I understand why that one, like making sure that one corner was okay was so important, and why my supervisor was giving me grief or whatever. And I'm sure I didn't help that assembly team much being there. I probably screwed up all sorts of things and got in their way, but it did have the impact of me being able to bring back to my my other little job what would be valuable and deliver them a better end result for very little time on my part. Of just it costs much of life. To me, I think a lot of improvements in life, because most of these problems seem so big and unmanageable and complex, but so many things. It's amazing how much just bringing awareness to things can solve, because just on the little micro levels of how you behave, or you get older and realize like, oh man, all those cigarettes that I threw out the window, all those butts, like things like that you just pick up on over time.
Right.
That's one of the incredible things that traveling does for you. And I think for me, it's one of the wonderful things of having started this podcast and getting to see so many different people in so many different disciplines, and seeing how it starts to piece together over time. How would you recommend someone that so we have a listener, listeners to the show are like I said, a range of people and backgrounds, but all clearly curious about science, or they wouldn't be here. Say people hear something about like this One Health initiative, and like, well, what can I do? How can I be involved? Do you have any advice for just how people can just go about learning more things of this nature, being involved more in their community, exploring? I'll just let you take it from there.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's an important question, because I do think people get inspired and become curious about lots of different topics. And if it's something where it is solving a problem, they want to figure out how they could be part of the solution. And I find that with a lot of young people, they will hear about a situation. They don't want to be part of the problem. They want to be part of the solution. What can they actually do? I think there's a lot of different approaches. So I remember years ago, I read an article about some conflict in a certain part of Africa, and some of the atrocities that were going on, and some of the ways that some of the medical conditions that resulted in some of the ways that the soldiers were behaving. And so there was just this article that was very graphic and very detailed, and it explained the situation, right? And I presented that to a number of students, and the response was very interesting because some responded by saying, I didn't read it all because it was uncomfortable. And so I didn't finish it. And then others said, I read it all. And at the bottom where it said, for more information, contact, and I contacted them. Right. And so I think that sometimes the information is there. There are ways, there's things out there for ways to get involved. It comes down to sometimes people's interest in addressing or confronting things that are uncomfortable. Right. I don't ever expect anybody to have a pleasurable time talking about children starving, right? That's not supposed to be a topic where we're having a good laugh, where it's like, I feel fun, right? That's not something that if you do have those kinds of emotional reactions, there might be something going on with you, because it's not a fun topic and it is serious. And so, being able to just going into it knowing that, hey, this is going to be uncomfortable. These topics they're not fun. But knowing that, I think, helps people address, or like at least be prepared for having those conversations, right? And it gets us past that uncomfortableness to the point where we can start to even think about what solutions might be, right? And then I think the other problem is, if it's new to you, that doesn't necessarily mean it's new to other people, right? And so often people will be presented with sort of a new idea, and they'll think about it. It'll impact them. They'll be thinking about it. You go, what? I had this idea. And you go like, well, that's great. And I'm glad that you had that idea. And I'm glad you were presented with this topic. But lots of people for a lot of years have also been dedicating their lives to studying this topic. And so for you to come in and be like, hey, I thought of this thing. This is the answer. Well, why not approach it with a little bit more humility, in the sense that I've been thinking about this topic. Who else is thinking about it? And who else has talked about it? What else has been done? Right. And most of the research that we do is publicly available, right? It's out there. I mean, get online and look some of this stuff up. Yeah, a lot of the journals and things, you don't have access to the whole article, but the abstracts are free to everyone, right? If you want to go find out some research on a particular topic, right, the science, it's published. Our whole job is to do these experiments and then to write those results up and get it out there so that the public can see them, right? And we don't get paid to do that. Like, I don't get paid for writing something. If we publish something, it's not like I get it's not like writing a book where you're selling the book and getting a royalty. We're not doing it for the money. We're doing it so that our results are out there so people can have a conversation with us about what we're learning. And I mean, it's interesting that a lot of that doesn't, like, it is out there, but whether or not anybody ever looks into that or not, I think we could do a better job as people of like looking into what's actually being done, instead of just saying, hey, I got this great idea. Have we ever thought about, whatever this thing is? And it's like, yeah, there's whole departments dedicated to that very topic that have been doing it for decades. So,
oh yeah, 8
why don't you check
years.
it out?
I've had 8 years now of like where I'm like, I think I solved it. I think I solved all of life. And then here's my idea. And then I'm fortunate with this that I can reach. I reach out to people. I'm like, well, who would actually know a lot about that? Right. And then reach out to them. And then very rarely does someone be like, oh, that's interesting. We could, it's pretty much always, no matter how clever I thought the idea was, someone always thought it was just delightful. It's also and that's, I mean, I guess it can be a little humbling, but it's still validating to know if you were on the right track. Like, oh wow, there was a whole department just for that idea. At least it wasn't good. It's better than hearing, nah, that's a shit idea.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, there's I guess the other side of it too is that the other side of the coin is you learn something new, and then you have the the curse of knowledge, where now you're just like furious that everyone else doesn't know the thing that you just learned yourself. Like, why don't people get it? It's right there. It's so clear. It's easy. And so like finding ways of communicating that it does. I don't know if how easy it is to get involved on just local level or whatever, what can be done in term, because there is such a disconnect. And something that comes to mind, there's let's see, Tracy Fanar. I've had her on a couple times. Boom, remembered her name. She a lot of marine biology stuff, but she did a lot of Florida red tide work. So you have these algae plumes, something like that. Blooms. Thank you. And a lot of it's you have like people in areas where I'm at in Wisconsin on the Mississippi, fertilizer running off into the rivers, going into the Gulf, increasing these plumes that then are impacting the local fishermen there. It's causing respiratory issues with people. It's killing off sea life, and the algae grows and grows and grows, and then it all dies off at once and just sucks all the oxygen out, and all this crap dies. And it's because of all the fertilizer runoff. It's unnatural compared to natural is a fickle word, but it's the human impact of it has increased what would have normally been happening without humans to a kind of to a degree that it's having this big impact. Well, the reason why I bring it up is the solutions are, having new irrigation and like kind of gutter systems and stuff, so that the fertilizer is not running. That's, one of the many solutions. But try explaining that to a farmer that's like trying to get by and now, hey, can you throw in? I have no idea how much this costs. Is I'm not the type that goes off collecting dead wood and drying it and say things have cost is imaginary to me. But say you're asking a farmer to pay $80,000 or something like that to do something that they've never heard of this. What's this algae situation in the Gulf? Or like, why would I
the Gulf's far away from where you are, so they may never go there, right?
You never go there. I care about the planet and human impact. I've never been asked to pony up $80,000 of my business money. You clearly need oversight and the government stepping in and using, unfortunately, taxpayers' dollars to manage these larger issues. And so, how do you get people involved in just educating the local populations on why these sorts of changes are important, even if they don't see the impact with their own eyes.
Right. We often refer to trade-offs that exist because sometimes, a solution for one might not be a solution for another. And so what's the balance, right? What if, so just coming back from Guatemala, and there's large sugarcane plantations there that use a lot of water. There's not a lot of regulation in how much water they can use. And so they're using a lot, and that affects people downstream, in their water use and availability. But it also has impacts in other ways on the environment. For example, is how do you harvest sugarcane? It's very tall, it's very dense, it has a lot of under leaves that are very difficult to walk through. Plus, what lives in a big sugarcane field? Mice and snakes. And so you have workers that are going to be walking through these big sugarcane plantations to cut it, but they don't want to deal with snakes. And so it's easier to burn out all that undergrowth and burn all those leaves off and then harvest. But that creates a lot of smoke. And so then you have respiratory problems with people living in the cities from all of these sugarcane plantations. And so you say, okay, so there's these water impacts, there's this air impacts to the people themselves. And they say, well, what are the solutions? well, one solution would be to use mechanization, use tractors. So don't burn and just use tractors to harvest it. Great. But now you don't need 20,000 employees to come cut your sugarcane anymore because you have a tractor. Right? So the trade-offs that there's not as much employment for poor rural families, but you're able to not burn all the sugarcane and your air quality is better. And so what's, in the long scheme, like what's the benefits? It's not a benefit to these guys, but it's a benefit to all these people. And so how do you square that? And how do you work on that in a balanced sense? And because there are trade-offs. And no, I don't have an answer to that, except that we see those longer term impacts, because then you have groups of people that don't have any employment options anymore. And so you're putting more constraints on them. And so the option of migrating to the north seems a lot better when they don't have any other options at home. And then you have people in Tennessee talking about what they see as a migrant problem, right? And you're saying, well, right, but that's also stemming from the fact that there's sugarcane being produced for sugar that you consume every day. So how do we work all those factors in together in an appropriate way to address the larger context of this? Do we eat less sugar? And so less is produced, but then it's employing less people. And so there's all of these impacts across lots of factors that are going to be involved. Right. And I don't have an answer to those. That's why they're complex problems, because they're complex and they have a lot of things going on. And it's not going to be, what I really don't like is I don't like when people say they just need this thing. And it's always like the one answer, right? It's like, oh, they just need, whenever I hear somebody say that, they just need, I'm always like, oh, here it comes. It's the solution for all of these big problems.
Yeah, like, the silver bullet.
Right. And come on, folks, it's not. That might be one part of it, sure. And you can suggest it, but like there's lots of other things going on too.
I mean, there's certainly just actually knowing what the problems are and acknowledging that they're there and being aware of them is a huge step toward, I mean, certainly there's no chance of finding any solution without the knowledge that there is a problem that we need a solution for. So that's at least an important aspect of it. So even when some of this stuff seems like too depressing because it seems too big or complex or hopeless or whatever, it's still just I think you kind of sort of mentioned earlier, just kind of gently moving toward that uncomfortable feeling and I mean, it's not a problem to be uncomfortable, right? And I think it's something that we need to recognize. If you're going to be talking about starving people, it's not going to be fun. It's not very comfortable of a topic. And so what? That's fine. It doesn't have to be comfortable. We can still address it, right? Still talk about it. But on the other side, it's like, well, you can get involved. There are lots of different local organizations and mechanisms by way in which people can get involved in these topics. It's more about the desire, right? In the moment when we're having a conversation about it, it seems like urgent. It seems, emotionally engaging. But sitting in budget meetings at a town hall meeting to try to understand how your local county is going to do something, that's boring, right? Nobody likes that kind of stuff. And so we don't go to those. I'd rather be home watching TV or whatever, watching my shows, doing something than I am going to be spending my time sitting down at this little, community meeting trying to address food security in my local county, right? Because that's not as interesting as talking about it and having it, being engaging in the moment. You can get involved. Everybody can read the research that's out there. They can talk to the organizations that are trying to implement solutions. Right? They're begging for people to come participate. They want people to come volunteer. Now, if you're trying to do it as a career, that's a different question because there's only limited funding. And so, you may not end up having a lucrative job working for some small county organization trying to understand the local water system, right? But doesn't mean you can't get involved. Doesn't mean they're not looking for volunteers and people that are willing and interested. I mean, I participated with a number of conservation organizations, and we're never at any risk of being bombarded with too many people. It's the opposite, right? It's like we have to compete with all of these other really fun and exciting topics that are at your fingertips online. You can stream and watch everything. And so we're competing with that. It's right. And so it's like you have to compete with that for people's time.
I say, well, if you're willing to use some of your time to get involved in some of these things, do it, right? It's out there. It's not that hard. It's just it's about matter of how much time you want to put into it.
You watching TV in this cabin of yours?
I don't have anything like that in the
Amazing.
Cabins. I don't.
That's if that's not a selling point for living in a cabin, man, I don't know what is. Oh,
yeah.
Get it. I never miss TV when I'm not consuming it. Never.
Right?
It's just when I'm consuming it, then I can't get enough.
Well, it only has impacts on social life, really. Like it doesn't. If you stop watching TV, it doesn't really impact you personally. It's only when you're trying to talk to people that watch a lot of TV does it have an impact, because you just you don't know what they're talking about.
Those conversations, I have plenty of conversations about TV. They're pretty shallow, there's not a lot of meat on the bone of like what's going to happen on the next episode. It makes for okay water cooler talk.
Sure.
Mostly because it's brief and and everyone can be on the same page. But conversations like this, I think, are ones that are more stimulating, and I think I would love to live in a world where more people were interested in just having bigger conversations.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I appreciate what you do. I can't wait to come and visit your cabin one day.
Dude, definitely.
By the way, life hack, everybody. If you see that abstract and you really want the paper, I generally find if you go to the author's site, you'll usually be able to get access from their site. There's a bunch of other little tricks like that too.
Sure. Well, and we have, because we write them, we have them, right? I have a PDF file, and so I can send it to anybody I want. So it's not that. I've often just directly email the author and say, hey, can I have a copy of that? And they're like, sure, here you go. Right. So
of course.
It's out there.
So it doesn't take that much extra effort if you're interested enough. Also, you can go to onehealth.tennessee.edu to learn more about the University of Tennessee as One Health Initiative and the uniting disciplines to protect and promote health of all life on Earth. And Dave, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, thank you very much for having me. It's great to talk.
Yeah, and thank you, listeners, for being such wonderful, curious people. We'll talk with you more next week.